So I will focus mostly on the U.S., although I think there are a number of challenges democracies everywhere are
Yeah.
facing that move back to those. But yeah, I mean, the U.S. Obviously it's where we are, an incredibly important country, and it's also of the advanced democracies, it's the one that has a a liberal authoritarian government right now. And so, I think the question is, one, how did we get that a liberal authoritarian government in the U.S.? And two, how can we, at some point, when it hopefully is out of power, how can we prevent that from happening again? Um, so, you know, the trajectory of the Republican Party in the U.S. over the last decade or so, it has really been terrifying, I think. This is a party that has embraced this authoritarian nihilism, and uh, the moment uh, that I think was not so much the first Trump election, although that was a real watershed. It was what happened after January 6th. Uh, and this was a moment in which the Republican Party could have said, you know what, that enough is enough. We are done with this. And in fact, that was the instinct of a lot of Republicans initially. And then they backed away from that. And I think there were a lot of folks in who said, well, you know, Trump will lose in 2020, and then the Republican Party will go back to normal. And I was skeptical of that at the time, but I think it was certainly a reasonable hypothesis. After January 6th, there was an opportunity for the Republican Party to say enough is enough. And instead, Trump doubled down, and the Republican Party said, you know what? How, however, whatever happened, Democrats are worse, and we're not going to let them have this impeachment, and we're going to defend Trump. And that created an even deeper divide in our political system. Now, Trump is has some superpowers, and one of them is that he is an incredible conflict entrepreneur. And this is a pattern among authoritarians everywhere that they are conflict entrepreneurs. They are polarizers. They are always trying to draw lines that create a division between us and them. Because in that division, they can say there are the true Americans, and then there are the traitors. Uh, and either you're on our side, or you're with the traitors. You're with the people who hate the country. And you know, the the dynamic of our political system, over the last decade plus, has been what I've described as a two-party doom loop, which is the escalating partisan warfare. And I think there are important asymmetries here. I think the Republican Party has clearly moved much further to an extreme position, but the point of this is it's constantly an escalation. It's a tit for tat. I think the Justice Department under Biden was right to go after Trump on for his role in January 6th, but from the perspective of Trump and his allies, well, that is an abuse of power, and now we have to fight back, right? And the gerrymandering situation is another good example of this. Democrats uh, in California said, well, if Republicans are going to gerrymander Texas, we're going to toss out our state-of-the-art citizen independent redistricting commission and go back to partisan gerrymandering. Now, I'm not a California resident. If I were, I would have voted for that, but I wouldn't have supported it in a sense that, like, I don't think that's the right thing to do, but I think it is the necessary thing to do because where does this lead, right? I mean, it's just escalation, escalation, and fundamentally, the legitimacy of a democratic system depends on elections uh, uh, being seen as fair. This is, democracy is a system in which parties can lose elections because you know that the next election will be another opportunity. And what has happened in the U.S. is it feels like if our party loses the election, then that's it. And I think there are, I particularly on the political right, although increasingly on the political left, there are folks who think that that's not. Far side loses, there must have been cheating. And I worry about intimidation at the ballot box in 2026. I worry about electoral related violence. I worry about the election security. I mean, Larry talked about challenges of running a safe election. Election officials are constantly being threatened. They're being intimidated. They're being pushed out. That is no way to run a democracy. But the problem, and this is where we get into this binary two-party doom loop, is that there's a lot of folks who think that the stakes of this election are so high that winning is more important than forbearance. And I worry that there's enough folks who are willing to subvert the practice of legitimate, free and fair elections because they see this as so important, so existential. They've bought into a rhetoric of dehumanization of the other side is not the opposition, but they are the enemy. And that really undermines democracy. And Trump obviously been an entrepreneur in this respect, but he's been enabled by an entire political party that whose elected representatives and spokespeople and media figures have bought into the idea that whatever Trump does, it's justifiable because the Democrats are worse. And there are certainly have been elected officials who were not on board with that, but very few of them are still in elected office because in our two-party system, there's no home for them in the Republican Party, and they're not Democrats. And this is where I come to the conclusion that we need some serious electoral reform, and that it needs to be pretty transformative, as proportional representation would be, to really create a space for a center-right party that is not the extreme liberal Trump party. That there's no space for that in our current system of single winner elections, and I think we really need to change the way we do voting because I think there is a pro-democracy, pro-rule of law, pro-decency majority, but it is currently it can't find its expression in the two-party system. There's a more intermediate step. I think fusion voting, which has long been legal in New York, presents an opportunity for that, rule of law, non-MAGA Republican coalition to potentially fuse with the Democrats. I was just out last week in Wisconsin at a conference at the University of Wisconsin Law School, and there is a lawsuit in Wisconsin to re-legalize fusion voting. It's led by a group of folks called United Wisconsin, which is led by the former Republican Senate Majority Leader in Wisconsin, a guy named Dale Schultz, who's a reasonable Republican whose party has left him, and he says, where's my party? A bunch of other folks, a lot of former liberal Republicans who feel abandoned by their party. They're not Democrats. They don't want to be Democrats, but they want to be able to cross-endorse moderate Democrats. There's a similar effort in Kansas. and in New Jersey. I think this has some promise as a way to re-empower a small but pivotal group in the political center. But I think the long-term solution here has to be a system of proportional representation to bring back some of the multidimensionality, the broader coalition space. And it also puts an end to gerrymandering. Gerrymandering really is only possible with our system of single winner election. So if we used a system of proportional representation, ideally with open list, which is the most common form, although I think there's a lot to say for the system of mixed member proportional, the German system of having a compensatory list, increase the size of the House of Representatives. But the idea is we've got to get out of this zero-sum binary that is just trapping us into this us versus them psychology, in which what there's so I mean, maybe this Epstein thing breaks the mega coalition, but I think there'll be a lot of pressure to say, well, Democrats are worse, stick together, uh, and it's that logic that has put in power in this current liberal administration, which is just doing so much long-term damage to so many policy areas, from climate to just the administrative capacity of this country, to health, to the international stage that Larry talked about. Um, but the and I tend to focus on the electoral system, but I've been trying to widen my aperture lately and think about some other things, because although I think the electoral system is important, and I think that in thus far in I'll just say in European countries there are far right parties, but none of them has earned total power, or even there's few places where they've been in coalition governments, and they're limited because they have to build a coalition. There was just the election in the Netherlands, in which there was a move back to the center after so I'm not sure how the Germany AFD is still, there's still a pretty solid cordon sanitaire preventing them from having any governing power. So I think that has held up, but there are some real problems, and Larry talked about social media. I think that is a tremendous challenge, and I mean there's the disinformation and the fake news problem, but I think there's another problem that I've been thinking a bit about lately, and this is not just social media but digital media more broadly, which is the extent to which it breeds negativity and distemper. Because look, news is inherently going to be focused on the negative, because where the negative is more interesting, problems are more interesting. We are drawn towards negativity, but I do feel like there has been a period of collective distemper. Some of it is the backlash to the financial crisis. Some of it is the backlash to COVID, but I think some of it is just that in this, information overload, social media, digital media world, more than ever, it is the negative news that dominates our feeds, because there's just so much news, and now that every article is measured by its clicks and engagement, we know that negative, we know that catastrophizing, we know that threats uh, are much more engaging than positive news, right? And nobody writes about the plane that lands safely. And I think as we are in this age of global news and international news, there's a lot that has always been terrible going on in the world. I mean, in many ways, I mean, life expectancy has never been higher. There's a lot of positive trends uh, uh, for global humanity. but there are also a lot more threats. There's, the threat of climate. I mean, climate disaster. I mean, there are many human rights violations. There's many awful things that are happening, and it is easier to have a news diet and news feed that is dominated by those things. And also the fact that they are further away from us makes us feel especially powerless. Uh, it makes us feel like everything's going to, falling apart. The world is a terrible place. And sure, if that is your selective attention, it does make the world feel like a terrible place. And it's not to say that there are not some real problems. Uh, but there are also a lot of conflict entrepreneurs who are driving engagement by making people feel threatened, by making people feel scared, by telling people that their country is being taken from them by immigrants, or everything is broken, everything is corrupt. And the diffuse fears of climate change, of AI and other technological change that really challenges people's lives is very scary. So I think we're in a moment in which a lot of people feel very powerless and lack sense of agency and are just overwhelmed by what feels like constant negativity. So I think that is a challenge throughout democracies. And one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in this area is, how do we get people to engage just at a more local community-based level, right? I mean, I think there's a sense, for a long time that we say, well, think globally, act locally, but maybe people should just also think locally, where they can have a sense of agency. And especially as so much that, like, there's a lot that we can do to mitigate climate by encouraging people to uh, do more stuff locally. I mean, whether that's local farming and or local craftsmanship rather than and also meaning. I mean, we're in this crisis. So many people are feeling isolated. So many people are feeling lonely, and that creates I think that also contributes to our collective democratic distemper. Is that when you're when you're isolated and don't feel that you're doing work that is meaning or purpose, that creates anger and rage. And there are a lot of a lot of entrepreneurial conflict seeking politicians who are seeing opportunity in stoking that, particularly among young men in the US. It's a real challenge. So I think, in addition, I mean, the electoral system is to me is very important, but I think that we also need to rethink a bit what we are doing for a crisis of purpose and meaning. And rather than feeding people on a diet of negative news that you have that is far away, and you have no power to stop. We need to think about how do we build some institutions and some community focused organizations that give people some sense of agency and connection that is closer to home, and also is channeled in ways that are productive for our environment.